Welcome to the Founders Odyssey podcast, where we educate, inspire, and create a supportive community for our fellow founders. Today, we have an exciting guest joining us, Dan Roberts. Dan Roberts is reinventing the legal experience for companies. He is the co-founder and president of Savvi.legal, a software company solving the complexities startup founders experience while trying to manage their company's legal information. Additionally, their platform facilitates founder and attorney interactions and accurately tracks and stores companies' legal information to empower both founders and attorneys. Prior to Savvi, Roberts was an attorney at Hunter Andrew Kurth, where he worked with hundreds of VC firms, accelerators, and startups throughout the country. He is most excited today for his technology platform, Savvi.legal, that they have and are building to completely revolutionize a stagnant legal industry. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nathan. Appreciate the opportunity. Always love, things where we can contribute to entrepreneurs and help out. Love entrepreneurship myself, so it's great being here.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. Why law, and why was that a big focus for you?
Great question. So, I actually never grew up wanting to be a lawyer. It wasn't necessarily something that was a focus of mine. Never even considered it as an option really until I got kind of through my college education and started looking at different options. One thing that I did know that I always loved was I've always loved working in entrepreneurship. My father was an entrepreneur, very early kind of software technology entrepreneur in the 80s and 90s. Grew up in that atmosphere and really enjoyed it and really appreciated it. Always wanted to be an entrepreneur myself, but going through college, kind of looking at different ways to get into it, I wanted to take a little bit different approach. A lot of entrepreneurs come through MBA programs or kind of focus on that business side. I had a little bit more of a technology background, but wanted to get some more exposure and experience. So went to law school with that thought in mind. Ended up, after I got my JD from University of Chicago, added another year on, did an advanced law degree called an LLM, specifically in law and entrepreneurship. And again, my focus has always been working with entrepreneurs, wanting to build that expertise, that knowledge that would allow me to continue operating in that space, provide more value to future clients. And so again, after I got through law school, went and specialized even more in law and entrepreneurship, and then worked for 3 years at a VC firm, in-house at a VC firm on the East Coast, and really kind of understanding the investment space, understanding what investors' thought processes were. And from there, went and joined a big international law firm, worked with a bunch of VCs, worked with a bunch of startups, everything from entity formation through financings to M&A, IPO, that whole gamut, that whole life cycle of a startup company. Worked in that space for up until I'd been a lawyer for about 10 years at that point and wanted to start my own company. Had recognized some of the missing links, recognized kind of what a stodgy industry the legal services industry was, and felt like there was a space there. And, like I said, I've always been entrepreneurial in nature. And so left big law to become an entrepreneur and started Savvi.legal, which is a legal technology platform. And also, still practice law on the side, still work with entrepreneurs. Again, that's a passion of mine. So continue to maintain those skills and continue to take on clients where I feel like it makes sense for me and the client. But again, that's kind of my story. Have worked on the investor side, have worked with hundreds of startups. I am a founder myself, so I understand what founders are going through. And that's kind of the background of what has given me, my expertise, my viewpoints, and all of that.
Let's talk about your viewpoints, and let's talk about formation of a company and how you should set proper expectations as founders. We've got a one founder, two founder, three founder, four founder teams. And what have you seen work in the past, and what's working for you now as the founder of a company, setting proper expectations?
Great question. And there's a few things you always got to keep in mind. Obviously, it's important to understand how the ownership plays out between founders, especially if there's more than one. Thinking about ahead towards investment and what your plans are in that regard, and thinking even beyond that to the exit strategy. What are your plans for acquisition, IPO? What are your thoughts there? Or maybe you don't ever plan on selling it. Are you planning on keeping this as kind of your lifestyle business going forward? So thinking about all of those goals is important before you go down this journey. If this is going to be a business where you're planning on it being just cash flow for you, that is a very different strategy or entity structure that you might want to take on compared to, I want to go raise money as soon as possible, grow this thing as big as possible, and sell it in 3 to 5 years, or 5 to 7 years, or 7 to 10 years, whatever that exit strategy might be. Those all will come into play when you're thinking about, the first few steps of forming your startup. So it's important to think about, should I be a corporation or an LLC? And if the plan is this is going to be a cash flow business you're going to be taking money out of down the road, an LLC may make sense. But if you're going to be raising money from investors, if you're going to go be growing this thing like crazy, issuing equity to employees, then usually a corporation is the type of entity you're going to form. So there's a few things to keep in mind there, but those are the really high level rules of thumb in deciding the entity structure. Once you've got your entity formed, the type of entity decided, then we kind of get to, okay, how many founders are there? What is the cap table going to look like? And there's a lot of important considerations here. One thing that is very important for any company that's going to have more than one stockholder is what we call a vesting schedule. So a vesting schedule that's where if somebody were to leave the company, they're not going to be able to walk away with all of their shares. The shares are going to vest over time as they contribute to the company. And the standard vesting schedule for founders as well as future employees is what we call your 4-year monthly vesting schedule with a 1-year cliff. So a 4-year schedule with 1-year cliff is kind of the short-term phrase there that we use. The way that works is for the first year that anybody works for the company, they're not going to vest in any of their shares. There's going to be a 1-year cliff that after 1 year, they'll vest in all of that first year's worth of shares. So if you are working with co-founders, it's important that you get this in place from the outset, because if anybody decides, hey, you know what, this isn't going where I want it to go, and they walk away, or they get an offer from a big tech company, Google, Amazon, and they ditch you for that big opportunity, they can't walk away with any of their equity if that happens in the first year. So it's very important to protecting your cap table that you get these vesting schedules in place. I'll just throw out there, whenever you issue equity with a vesting schedule, that stockholder is going to want to file what's called an 83B election, just a kind of important tax thing that has to be done within the first 30 days of getting the equity. Again, just from an educational perspective, want to mention that. But for purposes of your cap table, that vesting schedule is going to be very important. First of all, like I said, if somebody were to leave, you don't want them walking away with a big chunk of your company. You only want people to take what they've earned, and you earn into that equity through that vesting schedule. But more importantly, sometimes is when you go to bring on investors, they're going to want to make sure, first of all, that you're not going to take their money and then bail, leaving them, holding the bag, so to speak, of, hey, you just put $1 million into this company. I know you're going to want to make sure this thing succeeds so you don't lose that investment. So see ya, I'm out of here. That's not going to be an option. They're going to want the founders to all have vesting schedules. And it's important that again, from their perspective, that the founders have skin in the game. So if you are going to bring on investors, founder vesting schedules are important. And that's where, even if you are a solo founder, you'll probably even want to have a vesting schedule at that point. But one thing you want to keep in mind is that cap table is very important. It tells a story about your company, who owns your company, and where are those owners at right now. If you've got a bunch of people on your cap table that are no longer with the company, first of all, investors look at that ownership that is no longer sitting with contributing stockholders, contributing employees or founders. We call that dead equity. It is dead to the company because it's no longer providing value. Equity should provide value either by incentivizing current employees or founders to continue working at the company and growing this thing. If they've got a stake in the company, that equity incentivizes them to build this thing, because the bigger the company is, the more valuable their equity is. So it's providing incentives to team members. So if equity is held by somebody who is no longer providing services to the company, again, it's dead. It's not incentivizing anybody. It's not providing value to the company. So if we can get equity out of the hands of people who are leaving the company, that's very important. Investors look at that cap table. They want that cap table to tell them the story of who is contributing. What is that equity doing for the company? What incentives is it driving? So again, that cap table is very important. Getting it structured the right way, and making sure that the founders, splitting up that equity between founders is an important discussion. When you go and found a company with 2, 3, 4 founders, that equity split is going to be important for everybody to make sure that they're incentivized, they feel like their contributions are valued, and making that split is an important decision. That's one of the first conversations you should have in a company. You shouldn't get 2 or 3 or 6 months down the road before you decide on that equity split. You want that equity split to be determined before there's value in the company, because once the company starts churning money, churning revenue, people are gonna they're gonna hold the company hostage if you don't have everything papered up and documented correctly on the cap table. So get those equity splits determined out the gate. How you determine that, it's kind of up to you and your co-founders to determine equitable contributions, who's putting in time, who's putting in IP, who might be putting in money. Those are all factors that can go into that equity split. But really, it's there's a lot of people have published a lot of papers out there about determining that equity distribution. There's something called slicing pie. There's a bunch of different ways you could go about it. But really, it comes down to what is everybody comfortable with in valuing their contributions to the company. And
let's talk a little bit about that as founders. And I've been through my experience, and you have too multiple times now, and even from a consultative approach and from a lawyer and attorney standpoint. So you bring a lot of good insights to the table. So let's talk about that scenario where the founders are sitting there at the table, or I don't know where you want to be here. So let's go through a scenario where we're going to be talking now about equity. And how do you want to lay that out? Is it, you do this really well. So what I'm saying is, I think that everyone has to have their walls down, their egos down, to be able to set the stage for an acceptance of what may transpire.
Absolutely. And, every company is different, but you do want to get all the founders around a table and have this conversation. And one thing to keep in mind is, a lot of times there's kind of a primary founder, the guy who brings this idea to the table, who's taking on a bunch of risk by leaving his job, and this is his baby. And so there's some level of, this is kind of going to be the primary founder. That guy's going to drive the discussion and make some of the decisions about who gets what ownership. But in that scenario where there's a primary founder, that primary founder has to recognize he can't do this alone. And you have to be willing to give up some ownership to the other people who are taking risks. Everybody's taking a risk by joining a startup. They're not going to get paid their market rate out the gate. They're going to be giving up their current salary to leave that gig and join this gig. So everybody's taking risk, and you can't do this alone. So you are going to have to give up some ownership stake. And really, it's a matter of having that conversation. A lot of times it's easiest to have that conversation kind of one-on-one rather than have everybody around the table. In that scenario where it's a primary founder driving the conversation, he can go and sit down with each of the other founders and say, okay, what about if we do this? Are you comfortable with this ownership stake? Do you feel like this is, reflective of your value and your contribution? And rather than having kind of that core founder trying to manage everybody's egos at once, it's usually easier to have that one-off conversation. Now, if this is more of a scenario where you've got 2 or 3 or 4 people coming together where it's everybody's idea, we're all kind of putting in, contributing to this idea, that scenario's a little bit different. A lot of times that scenario is easiest to manage if you just split the equity evenly between everybody, especially if everybody's kind of coming together and, hey, this is a collaborative thing, let's make this happen. If there's not just kind of one main guy that's driving on this, then a lot of times even splits or close to even splits are going to be most equitable and the easiest way to get buy-in from everybody. The thing you got to watch out for is if there's only 2 people and you do a exactly even split, 50-50, you're going to have tiebreaker scenario where you can't get a tiebreaker. So a lot of times you'll want to have one person who does have that little bit more, 51-49. It's just, you got to come up with some way to break that tie and who's going to have the majority there. So if you've got 3, you've got a built-in tiebreaker. 2 out of 3 breaks the tie. If you got 4, again, you got a potential scenario there where 2 versus 2 is an unbreakable tie. So what do? Those are all things you got to keep in mind. But it's really hard to give a hard and fast rule like, hey, this is the tech guy, he's going to have this much. This is the business guy, he's going to have this much. This is the sales guy, he's going to have this much. It really varies so much from company to company, just based on whose idea is it, who's driving on this, who's going full time and who isn't. Sometimes you have people who are going to stay at their old job part time while somebody else dives in full time, and you should take into consideration all those things and divvying up that initial founder's equity.
Yes. Well, let's talk about investors, and let's talk about investors that are looking in, at the company and looking at the health of the cap table, and then also investors that have invested. How much do they own of the company, I guess, and how do you allocate that specific amount to that investor, and then also ways that the investor can invest. So let's cover over, safe notes. Let's cover over equity, and then also what founders are looking at, investors are looking at within that cap table.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about different types of financings, and then we can kind of move on from there. So there's 2 primary types of financings there's 3 when you're a founder. The first one, which we usually don't talk that much about, is just straight debt, raising debt from somebody who's going to get paid back plus interest at some point, and they're not going to own any chunk of your company. That's the first option. It's not usually an option for an early stage startup, because if I'm investing straight debt, I have to be confident I'm going to get paid back, or else I'm going to lose my money. So that's usually not on the table. And that leaves the other 2, which are the more common types of financings. One is what's called a convertible financing, and the other is selling equity or ownership stakes in your company. With a convertible financing, the way that works is somebody gives you money, and you don't sell them any ownership or stake in your company right away. They're buying a right to convert this investment into equity at a future date. And there's 2 primary types of convertible investments. There's what's called a SAFE, which is a contract, a simple agreement for future equity. That's the acronym for SAFE. That is a very common instrument used these days. Again, the idea here behind a SAFE is I put money in your company, I get a contract back, this SAFE agreement that allows me to get equity in the company at a future date or time. When you do have a preferred stock financing down the road, I'll convert into equity at that point. The primary investment terms in that convertible instrument is, how do I convert my investment at that future point in time into equity? And usually it's like a discount, or you're setting a fixed valuation of the company that they will convert into shares at that valuation, or at a discount. If you sell at $1 per share in a preferred stock financing and they get a 20% discount, you'll give them 80 shares at 80 cents per share, which gives them more shares per dollar invested. So that's how a SAFE works. The other type of convertible instrument is a convertible note. Very similar to a SAFE. It's, I'm putting money in and I'm going to convert into equity in your next preferred stock financing. But convertible note is slightly different in that it's a debt instrument. It does have interest. There's a maturity date where they could call their capital, make you pay them back at a point in time in the future. This goes as liability on your balance sheet, so which is why some people prefer a SAFE, because it doesn't show up as debt. But the convertible note is kind of a mixed instrument. It's got debt-like aspect. It's got that equity conversion right, and it's just a way for somebody to get upside protection while maintaining a little bit of downside protection. If the company does go under, they do hold debt. They're a creditor. They get first right of, getting paid back from the company. So those are the convertible instruments. Equity financings are where you're actually selling shares of your company at a price per share. And usually with investors, they're going to want preferred stock. Preferred stock allows a few more bells and whistles. They get liquidation preferences. They might have dividend preferences, so those usually don't come up. And they'll have certain voting rights that you can't take certain actions without that preferred stock. But that is typically the types of financings you're going to deal with. Now, when you are raising money from investors, the amount you raise, how far along your company is, a lot of times that's going to dictate what type of financing the investors are going to get. So if you're very early stage, investors are going to want to give you money in as simple as a way as possible, and that is the convertible financing. Convertible financings are a much easier way to raise money. If you're selling preferred stock, there's a lot of documentation you need to work through. So getting money early on in your company, you're going to do a convertible financing, either a SAFE or a convertible note. The transaction costs are going to be low. It's going to be, hey, give me your money. I'll give you this simple instrument. It's going to be super straightforward. And so you go into that. Now, once you've determined what type of financing you're doing, whether it's convertible or preferred stock, you got to negotiate the term sheet, what investors' rights you're going to have, or you're going to give them. All of that kind of, is up in the air for negotiation. And depending, again, on how much money they're giving you, is going to dictate what types of investor rights they're going to get. Once they've got that term sheet nailed down, they're going to dig into your company before they give you the money, to make sure everything looks good. And that's where that cap table diligence is important. Your legal diligence, making sure your legal documents are done well, done right. And they're going to dig into that due diligence process where they go and make sure your company checks the boxes. And so what kind of things are they looking at? Obviously there's the business diligence. Are your projections looking good? Is this a good industry to invest in, or is it looking up? What's your potential market cap? If you were to take over this market, what's the potential $1 billion opportunity, or is this only a $10 million opportunity? They're going to look at those business type diligence questions in researching your company. What's your pitch deck look like? They're going to ask for your financial statements, your profit and loss, your balance sheet, what's your cash flow look like, what's your run rate, what's your burn rate. These are all business type diligence questions that investors are going to look at. And then if they like what they see on the business side of things, they're going to ask their lawyer to get involved and say, hey, share your legal data room with my lawyer so that they can look through all your legal documents and make sure everything's buttoned up. They don't want to invest in a dumpster fire where potentially one founder could walk away with half of the equity. That's where the vesting schedules come into place. They're going to make sure all of your equity has vesting schedules. They're going to make sure that you don't have any of that dead equity on your cap table, or if you do have dead equity, there's at least a story behind it, or it's not too much of the cap table. They want to make sure that the founders are going to have a skin in the game, like we talked about. They're going to look at your incorporation documents, your bylaws, make sure that the board of directors is set up the right way. The one thing that we've talked about here is we've talked about investment and what kind of financial rights that people are going to get. But there's two factors in every investment. There's the economic rights, but then there's the governance rights. And so when you bring on an investor, you need to think about, what governance rights am I giving up? Am I giving up control of my company, or am I going to be able to maintain control? Am I giving up control of the board, or can I maintain control of the board while bringing on one board of director from the investors that will be able to have a say, be an advisor in those board meetings, but the founders control direction still. So you got to think about those governance related issues. Some investors will get information rights, the right to request periodic updates from the company, quarterly reports or annual reports, sometimes even monthly reports. So I recommend you try to push back there. They're going to have certain rights to invest in future rounds of your company. So these are all investor rights that you're going to have to think about. And talking about the governance piece, it's important. That's another big important factor when you're looking at your founder shares and who holds how many shares. Remember that governance is important, because whoever sits on the board of directors is going to control the direction of the company and future equity issuances. Whoever is the stockholders, whoever has majority stock ownership, is going to control who sits on the board of directors. So those are different pieces that you got to keep in mind. So when you give up ownership to investors, how much ownership are they getting? Are they going to be able to control stockholder votes? Usually not, but are they requesting that they get a board seat, and how many board seats are they getting? So those are all factors you got to keep in mind when you're looking at investments and looking at investor term sheets. Those are the things that you got to look at.
So as we're discussing here, it seems like, organization is certainly key. And let's take a look at what you and your team are developing that is making the organization process just so streamlined. I've looked at your software, we've used it with our company, and I've just been thankful in that regards. But could you explain how this whole process just makes it so much easier, and you're really solving problems that a lot of people are experiencing throughout this process? Tell me a little bit more about Savvi and where you guys are heading.
Awesome. So Savvi is the legal technology platform that I co-founded coming out of working at Big Law. And really the goal behind Savvi is to provide business owners or investors who are investors might be forming businesses themselves, but anybody who's forming a business that forms an entity to accomplish something, we're providing a legal operating system for that person. So for startup founders, we've talked about a lot of different legal documents and tasks with legal implications here. Your entity formation, your governance, your cap table. These are all things that you want to make sure you do them right. And importantly, when you get to the point where investors are looking at you, they're going to want to make sure you've done it right, or else they won't invest. And so it's very, very important you get these things done right. And historically, the rule of thumb basically for tech startups was, if you want to do it right, you need to go to a lawyer, because you go to LegalZoom and those documents aren't going to be geared for a high growth, IP intensive technology company that has very different legal needs from, let's say, a food truck. Somebody who's just starting a food truck, they might have a lot of very simplified legal needs. And that's where LegalZoom is great. But for a tech company, where you're going to have investors coming and doing this very, very deep dive due diligence event, that's not going to cut it. And so what Savvi's meant, we started out to provide, is kind of a LegalZoom experience for more complicated business structures, like a technology company. And it's not just the documents that Savvi provides. So we do provide we provide a toolbox, and one of those tools is provide you a library of templates. Getting good legal documents, that used to be why you would go to a law firm. But there's been a lot of commoditization of good legal documents later, which you're able to find good legal documents that have been vetted by good lawyers on a lot of different tech platforms these days. And so, we provide that tool in our toolbox in our legal operating system. There's that application where we provide founders with a good set of legal templates, whether they're your organizational templates, your entity formation and bylaws documents, or board and stockholder consent documents, whether they're your employment documents, so getting your good documents in place so that when you hire an employee and they're coding for you or creating, marketing materials, you want to make sure that the company owns that, because investors are going to make sure that want to make sure the company owns that, or else they won't invest. So you need to get good documents in place whenever you hire somebody, whenever you bring on a contractor, whenever you have somebody that's contributing into your company. You need good legal documents, and we provide a workflow library with those templates. And there's also the equity agreements, making sure that you have good equity agreements that have those vesting schedules in place, or when you set up a stock option plan. We provide that library of templates. And it's not just the documents that we provide. We provide a system where you can automate these. And so when you need to use one of our templates, you can go into a workflow and you put in the name and the email of the recipient, a few data points that are necessary for building out that document. So if it's an equity agreement, how many shares are you giving them? What's the price per share? What's the vesting schedule? What's the vesting schedule start date? Those data points needed to build whatever document you're generating. We'll collect those, and you just hit submit on the platform, and it's going to generate the document, send it out for electronic signature. And then importantly, once it's signed, we're collecting that document, because we mentioned in that investor due diligence experience, they're going to ask you for what's called a data room. Show me where all of your legal documents live so that we can dig through them. So one of the other tools that Savvi provides is it's providing you with these templates. That's great, sure. But it's also providing you this data room where once documents get signed, they're automatically brought in to your data room, and we're organizing those documents in a very succinct and understandable way, so that when you need to share documents with somebody, it's the click of a button. Hey, share these documents with this person. Share my whole data room with this person. But we're also doing a lot with the data room space, where allowing you to share specific documents in specific transactions with somebody. So let's say you are hiring a new employee and you need to share your employee handbook, your anti-discrimination policy, and maybe your option plan with that employee. You don't want to download or share your entire document system with that person. So it's very easy within our system to be able to create that transaction specific room and say, okay, add these 3 documents into here, generate the documents, and then send it to the employee. When you're onboarding them, they're going to get the e-signature to sign your IP and confidentiality agreement, but they're also going to get a link to see, here's the other relevant documents you need to see. And so, in that employment context, that's the scenario. If you're issuing stock options to somebody, well, they need to sign the stock option agreement, but you also will need to share with them, your stock option plan and maybe a few other documents. And so creating these transaction specific data rooms that's very easy to create. Every time you send a document out, you can share documents with that recipient. So creating this legal operating system where it's very simple to send out documents, but it's also keeping track of all of your legal data, keeping track of all of those documents in one organized place. And then because all of that data and documents are in one place, it's very easy to generate reports, generate your cap table, or even more importantly, our system can keep track of certain tasks that might need to be on the horizon for you. So if you've formed a business in Delaware, for example, you have annual state filings in Delaware you need to make, and our system can notify you, hey, you've got these state filings coming up, Delaware, Chicago, Illinois, and Texas, or wherever you're incorporated in. We can keep track of those for you and notify you. So that's what Savvi provides. It provides a system for you to be able to have good templates, good documents, storing those documents. And then the last piece is Savvi is a collaborative platform. So if you have different team members, whether they're a lawyer at a law firm that you're working with, or an accountant that might need to access these different tasks or documents, we make it very easy to collaborate with those people, bring them into your account, give them certain access or permissions, and bring them into a specific transaction and say, hey, I'm doing this financing transaction. Can you get in here and make sure that the language that I'm putting in here looks good, or can you submit this for me just after you've reviewed it? So making a very collaborative platform as well. That's what Savvi provides to companies. We've got over 1,000 or 1,500 companies on the platform at this point. We've done thousands of entity formations, hundreds of financings on our platform. We're generating hundreds of documents on our platform every week for companies that are just like you, founders that are trying to, they don't want to spend time keeping track of documents, generating documents, sending documents for signature. They want to build the company. That's what you should be spending your time on: building companies, selling product, building that product, building marketing information. That's where you as a founder should be spending your time. You shouldn't have to spend your time being a glorified word processor where you're generating documents, sending e-signatures, collecting them, making sure everything's in order.
I agree 100%. Tell me a little bit about the structure of your company and where you see it going here in the next, let's say, 3 years. Are you guys looking for acquisition? Are you looking for more financing? How have you structured your company?
Great question, Nathan. And so we started Savvi very much with the idea of, we want this to be kind of a venture-backed company. That said, we bootstrapped it for the first 2 years. Basically, I was able to continue being a lawyer, providing legal services, and I would take money from that side gig, so to speak, and funnel that into Savvi, which allowed us to bootstrap for the initial phases. And so we actually haven't had to take any venture financing. That said, we have taken money from some institutional investors more as angel investments, and we've taken them through convertible instruments, through safes. And we used that more as a way to get buy-in from the industry. And so we went and found a bunch of different investors and took small checks from a bunch of them to say, hey, we want you to feel like you have a stake in our success, but we're not going to dilute ourselves very much because we don't need it at this point. Our cash flow is fine. And so with that bootstrapping strategy, it's allowed us to get to this point without having to go and raise a big financing round. But really, the next, you say, what's our roadmap for the next 3 years? And it kind of, we feel like we have a lot of freedom because we haven't taken any big financing. We're able to still maintain control of the direction of our company. And so there's a lot of directions we can go. Really, we view our platform as a very, very customizable, very flexible platform, where the first application of the platform was creating this workflow library in this use case for tech startups. But we've expanded it, and now we have multiple solutions on there. We actually have a product specifically for investors now. So if investors are forming a fund or creating special purpose vehicles for their investments, they can do that through Savvi. And we have templates and workflow libraries for that vertical of customer. And we see the opportunity here for us to be able to create this very horizontal platform where we can continue to create a lot of verticals. So maybe we'll create a vertical for nonprofit companies, giving them a streamlined legal operating system with templates that are specific to their use case. But really, the bigger opportunity we think is being able to sell a platform as a service where legal is everywhere. And, a lot of startups have legal touch points where they need to generate legal documents as part of what they're providing their customers. And we see Savvi as having a platform where we could actually give you an API so that you can build your platform, and then we are the legal tool that you use to generate your legal documents. And so for an example here, if somebody's building a crowdfunding platform, that's their business. They're going out, making it easy for people to do crowdfunding. Well, a small but important piece of a crowdfunding transaction is generating the legal documents for those crowdfunding investors. And you don't want to have to go and build your own legal document automation system just to be able to offer crowdfunding to people. And so what we want to be able to do is provide you a tool that you can embed into your app. And so that Savvi is powering the legal behind everybody else's apps. And if you think of Stripe as the financial transactions platform that facilitates financial transactions for everybody else's platforms, we want to be that legal transactions platform that you can plug into your app. And so that's kind of the direction we see ourselves heading, see it as a very, very big opportunity. And because of that, we've kind of held off on raising venture capital so that we can control our destiny, control our own direction, and kind of determine how big is this thing really going to be before we go out and raise the capital to blow it up. But that's kind of what we've done as a startup. We have raised some money, but we've raised it in a very deliberate manner that's kind of helped us to both drive revenue, selling into these investors as customers, and while also providing working capital as from the investment.
Well, I can tell you're certainly in one of the hottest markets in the United States and almost all the world there in Salt Lake area, right?
Yeah, no, we're located here in the Mountain West, what we call Silicon Slopes, and it is pretty hot right now. A lot of people, leaving some of the more traditional areas, Silicon Valley, just because it's so expensive out there, coming out to these other locations, Boulder and Utah County in Utah, and Austin, Texas, just because it's a little bit cheaper. And so things are definitely blowing up in these areas, and we like it out here. A lot of good opportunity, we think.
I can see exactly where you're trying to take this platform and the ability to scale. So I'll talk offline. I've got a lot of different ideas I'm going to share you, but I'm excited for you. I'm excited for the future of Savvi. Like I said, I've just been thankful for the opportunity to use your software that you and your team have put together. I'm getting to know you a little bit better as an individual. And, I just want to end it out here by having you explain just why do you do what you do? Just let me know more about your passion, and we'll close it out.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this a little bit in, when I was talking about my background, but entrepreneurship's just had a big impact in my life, both from my dad, and a lot of my siblings are entrepreneurs. And I from my own perspective, I love working with that type of person. They're energetic, they're passionate, and it gives me energy to what I do, to be able to go talk to these people on a day-to-day basis, find out about the new, world-breaking technologies that people are coming up with, and being able to be a part of those, even if it's just a small way. That's what drives me, what I really enjoy. So that's kind of why I do what I do.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you once again for joining us here on the Founders Odyssey podcast, where we look to educate, inspire, and create connections amongst all of our founder friends. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast today with Mr. Roberts of Savvi.legal. And if you haven't, feel free to go check them out, Savvi.legal. And you guys will be blown away by the platform that they've created. Thank you so much. You have anything else to say for us and our listeners today?
No, thanks everybody. Again, I really appreciate it, Nathan. Anybody who wants to check us out, it's Savvi.legal. So it's spelled a little bit weird, but yeah, come check us out at Savvi.
Okay, feel free guys to like and subscribe to this, and we'll look forward to hearing from you again.